Who is more powerful? A king of men who led his people into one of the fiercest battles in Middle-earth? Or the steward of the most powerful kingdom, who diligently watched and guarded the border of Mordor? Join me today as we explore this question and analyze the history and key strengths of both Denethor, Steward of Gondor, and Theoden, King of Rohan. And by the end of this video, we'll determine once and for all who is more powerful. My name is Gibby, and welcome to my channel, Factor Fantasy, where we discuss Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, analyzing characters, lore, and more every single week. This is episode 3 and what has become my Who's More Powerful series. By the way, I haven't done this for Harry Potter characters yet, so leave a comment below on any of those that you'd want me to do in the future. But you can go to my channel after this video to check out my Gandalf vs Galadriel and Thorin vs Gimli videos. Today is an interesting one though, because we're looking at two men in Tolkien's works, and not just any men, but two men who are at the forefront of their people groups. And I know it might seem odd to compare Theoden to Denethor, especially considering both of their movie versions, because it might seem like a complete landslide in Theoden's direction. But remember, this isn't necessarily about who you like more, this is about who is more powerful. And today I'm going to break that down into three main categories: magical, mental, and physical strength. And ultimately, the final decision will be up to you. Throughout each section, I'll be revealing the key moments from Theoden and Denethor's stories that best exemplify these areas of strength, and by the end of the video, I want to hear from you on who you think gets the victory. So with that being said, let's dive into things by doing a brief overview of each character's history, and then we'll analyze their strengths. Theoden was born in the Third Age 2948 to Thengel and Morwen. His mother was a Gondorian noblewoman, and his father served in Gondor before becoming king of Rohan. Eventually, Theoden returned to Rohan as a teenager when his father began his rule, and then he became king himself at the age of 42 after his father died. Theoden had married a woman named Elfhild, who unfortunately passed away during childbirth. Thankfully though, his son Theodred survived, and Theoden raised him along with his niece and nephew, Éowyn and Éomer. Theoden's reign was marked by a growing darkness as Sauron regained his strength and Isengard began to turn evil. And eventually, Theoden fell under Saruman's influence, with Grima Wormtongue becoming his chief advisor while secretly working for the wizard. Thankfully, Gandalf came to save the day and released Theoden from Saruman's control. Theoden then regained his vitality and strength and rode to Helm's Deep with his people to face Saruman's forces head-on. Soon after that victory, he rode to Isengard and faced the old wizard himself, resisting Saruman's voice this time. After this, Theoden made his way to Dunharrow, where he mustered the riders of Rohan and then set out to aid Minas Tirith in their fight. The king and his men eventually made it to the Pelennor Fields, where he bravely charged into a fight that was almost guaranteed to fail for them. During this fight, he took a chieftain of the Haradrim head-on and slew him, causing his honor guard to flee. But sadly, Theoden's life came to an end as the Witch King came down upon him and his horse Snowmane was thrown to the ground, crushing Theoden in the process. Later, Theoden was laid to rest in Edoras and became the first king since Eorl the Young to die in battle. And now that we've got a grasp on Theoden's history and lore, let's take a brief look at the life of Denethor, Steward of Gondor. Denethor was born in the Third Age 2930, making him a surprising 18 years older than Theoden, which never really got communicated in the movie. Being of Númenórean descent, he would have lived slightly longer than the average man, but still, 18 years is a lot more than I thought. Anyway, Denethor II was born to Ecthelion II, 25th Steward of Gondor. Denethor grew up in the shadow of Mordor, as Sauron returned to his old home in 2942, and then openly declared himself in 2951. During Denethor's young life, he helped serve his people but resented one counselor of his father in particular, a man named Thorongil. This man happened to be a young Aragorn, who assisted not only Ecthelion II, but Thengel, Theoden's father. The other captains of Gondor loved Thorongil, and Ecthelion also loved him above all else, including his own son. Now I bet you're starting to understand why Denethor was such a poor father. Anyway, Denethor eventually found out about Thorongil's identity and believed Gandalf to be involved in trying to make Aragorn king. But Denethor would not yield the position and was happy to see Aragorn leave Minas Tirith and not return after an assault on Umbar. Aragorn survived, but he wrote a letter of farewell to Ecthelion explaining he would not return. And despite being happy that Aragorn left, Denethor did not forget this Ranger of the North. Eventually, Denethor married Finduilas, who was the daughter of Prince Adriel of Dol Amroth. She was 20 years younger than him, and she hated being apart from the sea, and eventually she passed in 2988, leaving Denethor even more grim than before. Now, to fast forward a bit to the events of The Lord of the Rings, Denethor reluctantly agreed to let Boromir go on his mission to Rivendell. We all know how that turned out, as he learns of Boromir's death and is filled with grief. But something that's different from the movie is that Denethor still continued to lead his people in the book, and sets up defenses as the different regions of Gondor come to Minas Tirith's aid. Denethor did in fact order that the beacons be lit, unlike the movie. What causes him to ultimately go mad is his constant use of the Palantir, which Sauron used to manipulate the Steward by showing him only the worst possible outcomes of the war. Finally, after failing to burn himself and Faramir on a pyre, Denethor met his end by burning alone while he held the Palantir. I know I skipped over a lot of stuff there, but that general history will help us dive into our 3 categories of strength for today's video. If you'd like a full video all about Denethor's complete history and rule in Gondor, leave a comment below. Now, before I dive into our characters' strengths today, I want to give a shout out to Jason, Cody, Joshua, and the rest of my incredible Patreon supporters who help make these videos possible every month. If you're a regular viewer of the channel and you want to help support these videos, I'd encourage you to check out the Patreon and become a member today. I post behind-the-scenes content on there every week, and every video I make goes out early for all Patreon members to view. Regardless of how you choose to support, I appreciate you all so much, and it means the world to me that you take the time out of your day to watch these videos. So anyway, with that being said, let's dive into our 3 categories of strength, starting with magic. This is kind of anticlimactic, but I think it goes without saying that these 2 characters don't possess magical strength. I guess some of you would consider Denethor's use of the Palantir as magic, but it's not really anything inherent to his person. It's simply a tool. We'll definitely talk more about the Palantir in a bit, but that falls more under our next category, which is mental strength. And to start this category, we're going to take a look at Theoden. When it comes to mental strength, Theoden is an interesting case because he has one major negative right off the bat, and that is the fact that he fell to Saruman's manipulation. This of course will take some off of his score today for this category, but how much? The real question is, was he able to resist Saruman's influence in the first place? As we know, Saruman is known for his voice, which has the power to coerce and control those with weaker minds. And the key to this is kind of in what I just said. It seems like, due to Theoden's life before these events, he had been weakened. If you think about it, he was surrounded by death and darkness, and became the ruler of a weakened people as evil spread across Middle-earth. It isn't until after he is freed from Saruman's control that he flips a mental switch, which brings us to his strengths in this category. Despite falling in the first place, Theoden's rebound is one of the greatest in the entire saga. He bounces back better than ever and leads his people to victory at the Hornburg. Yes, he had help, and we'll cover this more in the physical strength category, but it's extremely mental as well. While he could have given up and wallowed in his own self-pity, he didn't. Plus, in the books, when confronting Saruman at Isengard, Theoden has to prove this new mental strength as Saruman yet again tries to influence him. But this time, Theoden comes out on top as he resists the voice of Saruman and stands firm alongside Gandalf and the others. Now, of course, we have to consider that part of this could be because he was beside Gandalf, who literally has a ring of power which bolsters mental strength. But Gandalf was also with Denethor, and we see how that turned out. Anyway, a couple more things that I want to mention for Theoden in this category is that he then led his people to aid Gondor, knowing that he would most certainly be riding to his own death. I don't know about you, but it takes a lot of mental strength to go do what is right, despite knowing that you probably won't come back from it. Additionally, Theoden raised 3 children by himself. I know, I'm sure he had help, but still, he was the father figure for 3 kids, 2 of which weren't even his, but he still took care of them anyway. This earns him some extra mental strength points in my book, in the same way that Denethor's lack of love for his children will subtract points for him. Finally, for Theoden, I need to mention his battle strategy and strength in diplomacy. When it comes to mental strength, strategy and communication are at the forefront of what we judge, and Theoden in the book shows loads more of this than his movie counterpart, as we listen to him orchestrate multiple battles, and his experience with Gon-Burigan as the Rohirrim approach Minas Tirith show his skill in diplomacy as well. If you don't know, Gon-Burigan was the leader of the Druidine people who lived in the forest surrounding the Pelennor fields. The orcs had stopped up the roads as the Rohirrim went to Gondor, and Gan helped lead Theoden and his people through the woods to a different entrance, securing them a strategic location for the battle, all while the enemy was unaware of them. Anyway, Gan and his people weren't too fond of men, because men in past ages used to hunt and kill Druedain. But Theoden speaks with him and they come to an agreement, showing Theoden's skill in diplomacy and negotiation. So, taking both positive and negative examples into account, I give Theoden a 7.5 out of 10 for mental strength. As for Denethor, we have a much different story. One of a man who leads the largest nation of men in Middle-earth, but eventually falls due to messing with powers beyond him. But does that mean he had no mental strength? Absolutely not. Denethor is noted as someone with one of the strongest wills in Middle-earth. In fact, when Gandalf and Pippin visit him for the first time, Denethor has a battle of wills with the wizard, and almost comes out on top. We also read that because he was of Númenórean descent, he was blessed with keen sight and could perceive that which was far from him. We do learn later that part of this was due to the Palantir, but that's not a complete negative. Now, just to explain for those of you who have only seen the movies, Denethor goes mad for a very specific reason in the books. You see, we read that he had been using one of the Palantiri to see far and wide, which is how he gathered most of his news. This actually aided him for many years, but eventually when Sauron returned to Barad-dûr, the Dark Lord began to use the visions in the Palantir to manipulate Denethor. He would show the Steward only the worst possible outcomes of the war, which eventually drove Denethor insane. In the movie, we tend to write off Denethor as horrible and crazy, but if you think about it, Theoden fell to Saruman's control, and it took Gandalf to free him. We know that Sauron was much more powerful than Saruman, so Denethor's manipulation was probably way worse than what Theoden dealt with. And Denethor resisted for quite a while, using the Palantir to his advantage. It wasn't until he thought both of his sons were dead that Sauron officially broke him. So in my opinion, this kind of goes to show Denethor's extreme mental strength and will. Additionally, Denethor was on the forefront of the battle lines, living in Minas Tirith and guarding the rest of Middle-earth from the evil of Mordor. He successfully acts as leader for decades, defending the lands surrounding Sauron's territory, which was no easy feat. That is something that Theoden and many other leaders did not have to deal with. Now, as for negatives, Denethor was in fact a horrible father. Shocker. So despite his success in leadership, diplomacy, and battle, he neglected one of the most important areas of his life, which were his sons. And of course, although he held strong for a while, he eventually did fall to Sauron's manipulation, which means that he is not on the level of a Galadriel or a Gandalf. But of course, we already knew that. And now, I know this might seem insane, but based on what I know from the book, I have to give Denethor an 8 out of 10 for his mental strength. And I can already hear the furious typing of keyboards as you all head to the comments and absolutely toast me for putting Denethor above Theoden. But the reality is that Theoden was weak-minded for quite a while, and then it isn't until he has the positive influence of Gandalf that he gets his mojo back. Plus, he is bolstered by Aragorn's presence as well. Now, I love Theoden and I like him way more than Denethor, but again, this isn't about who I like, it's about what Tolkien says. And Denethor is clearly written as a strong-minded individual, whose isolation and use of something far more powerful than himself ultimately causes his demise. But out of everyone in the books, he is one of the only men who had a battle of wills with Sauron himself, and it seems that he did this multiple times before falling. The last thing I'll say on this before getting to physical strength is that mental strength doesn't equate to any kind of morality. Tolkien himself said that had Denethor survived, he would have definitely become a tyrant, refusing to give up the throne. However, Tolkien also writes that Denethor was a man of great strength of will and integrity before Faramir's death. But as always, drop your comments below on your scores for these characters in this category. Now, moving on to physical strength, we come to something a bit more straightforward. Starting with Theoden, let's look at the greatest examples from the book that display his physical skill and strength. First, from early on in his life as the first Marshal of the Mark, which was the highest position one could hold in Rohan's military, Theoden is noted as a strong and skilled fighter. Plus, Theoden gets bonus points for being skilled as a horse rider. While the noblemen of Gondor had access to horses, they were not nearly as well trained in combat on them, and we even read in the books that the people of Minas Tirith were in awe of Shadowfax when Gandalf and Pippin arrived. Anyway, other than this general note by Tolkien regarding Theoden's early life, we have some good examples of his physical strength in the battles we see him in. specifically the Battle of Helm's Deep and the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Something to keep in mind is that Theoden fought in these battles at the age of 71. This is why repeatedly in the book, his people are telling him to go with the women and children to Dunharrow, but he refuses. That's part of his bounce back, as he realizes that he had been a bad king for so long, and he wanted to prove himself, and if he died, it would at least be a noble death. So at the age of 71, he was fighting at Helm's Deep. Just think about that. That's pretty insane. Plus, riding a horse isn't easy at an age like that. Anyway, the last thing I'll mention here for Theoden is a specific example from the Battle of the Pelennor Fields itself. And to really hammer home the magnitude of this physical feat, I'm just gonna read straight from the book. So here's what it says. Many foes stood before, and on the further half of the plain were other hosts still unfought. Southward beyond the road lay the main force of the Haradrim, and there their horsemen were gathered about the standard of their chieftain. And he looked out, and in the growing light he saw the banner of the king, and that it was far ahead of the battle with few men about it. Then he was filled with a red wrath, and shouted aloud, and displaying his standard, black serpent upon scarlet, he came against the white horse in the green with great press of men, and the drawing of the scimitars of the Southrons were like a glitter of stars. Then Theoden was aware of him, and he would not wait for his onset, but crying to Snowmane, he charged headlong to greet him. Great was the clash of their meeting, but the white fury of the Northmen burned the hotter, and more skilled was their knighthood with long spears and bitter. Fewer were they, but they clove through the Southrons like a firebolt in a forest. Right through the press drove Theoden Thengol's son, and his spear shivered as he threw down their chieftain. Out swept his sword, and he spurred to the standard, hewed staff and bearer, and the black serpent foundered. Then all that was left unslain of their cavalry turned and fled far away. This is an incredible part of the battle, and perfectly written by Tolkien, who knew that he was about to kill off this key character. Instead of immediately bringing him to his end, Tolkien chose to showcase the culmination of Theoden's character arc as he single-handedly charges the enemy chieftain and throws him down, scaring off the rest of the Harad men. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, soon after this, Theoden does meet his end. However, I'm not going to count his death against his score at all, because honestly, it doesn't matter what your age, strength, agility, or anything else is if a fell beast tosses your 900-pound horse on top of you. There wasn't much Theoden could do there. So, all in all, I give Theoden Thengol's son a 9 out of 10 for physical strength. And finally, that brings us to Denethor. When it comes to physical strength, there isn't much we can say about Denethor, as he mostly spent his time as a politician and military leader. Yes, I'm sure he was trained well, and perhaps even acted as a captain of Gondor in a similar capacity to his own sons, but I don't think he had the same level of exploits that we read about for Theoden. I think Denethor liked to be more of the military leader and prided himself on his mind more than his skill with the sword. For example, when Tolkien describes the Steward, he chooses to focus on his mental attributes. He wrote that Denethor was a proud man, tall, valiant, and more kingly than any man that had appeared in Gondor for many lives of men. And he was wise also, and far-sighted, and learned in lore. Now, despite the focus being on his mental strength, we do learn in the books that Denethor was always ready for a fight, and even kept armor on under his robes, as well as a sword. We read this in the book. He stood up and cast open his long black cloak, and behold, he was clad in mail beneath, and girt with a long sword, great-hilted in a sheath of black and silver. Thus I have walked, and thus now for many years I have slept, he said, lest with age the body should grow soft and timid. So as we can see, Denethor was not afraid of a fight and was always prepared for battle. But even so, in the book, he doesn't ever join the fight like a Theoden or Aragorn does. So maybe this was more of a show than an actual example of his skill with the blade. And so after everything, I can only give him a 7 out of 10. And that's with assuming that he was a captain of Gondor in his early years. If he wasn't involved in battles early on, then I give him a 6 out of 10. Which means that after looking at the magical, mental, and physical strengths of both Denethor and Theoden, the victory goes to Theoden, King of Rohan. Despite falling short in the mental strength category, his overall score is higher than Denethor's, and therefore he takes the crown, literally. But what do you think? Who do you think is the strongest character? Let me know your answer in the comments below, and also comment if you feel that I missed any super important moments for each of these characters. As always, be sure to like and subscribe, and check out the series playlist to catch up on any episodes you might have missed so far. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.